Not too long ago, many people were saying that China is one of the biggest threats to the world economy. Now China has fell into deflation, and Joe Biden called China a ticking time bomb because of how bad they're doing economically. Is China one of the biggest threats to the world economy today?
Well, in a way, obviously, if there's a tremendous amount of trade that has depended on relationships with China, which is the case over many years, if China's economy is going under, that will affect many other economies, because the world is interdependent, and this is what we try and explain when we have debates about nationalism. From a trade, from an economy, from a climate change, from a terrorism, from a security, from a migration perspective, the world is entirely interdependent. So if a major economy goes under, that undoubtedly has a knock-on effect on other economies around the world. So of course it is a serious cause for concern. Now maybe this will give other countries an opportunity to rethink their industrial strategies, their economic strategies. For example, in this country, unfortunately, we didn't protect our manufacturing industry in the way that we should have done, and it went to the wall largely. There's no reason why we can't look at through an active industrial strategy, for a regional policy, for what the government used to describe as levelling up, why we can't invest in high-tech manufacturing and get Britain moving again from a business point of view. So the China point is, of course it's serious.
Yeah, but on the point of China, so there's two ways of it being serious. One is internally they're going to go down with deflation, but in terms of how of the deals they're doing with other countries to bring other countries down.
Well, obviously, it's extremely concerning. And also, if they get desperate economically, they may start doing deals with all sorts of countries that we would rather they didn't have positive relations with. We can think of Iran, we can think of North Korea.
So what should we do about that? How can countries deal with that? With China?
Well, we have to continue to have a relationship with China. Yeah. We have to have a... I was the Minister for UK-Chinese relations for a period, and what was clear was that the Chinese only ever acted in their self-interest, but they did trust us to have private, adult, mature dialogue with all sorts of sensitive issues, providing it was in private. They trusted the UK. They didn't trust many other countries, okay? So we should be using that private dialogue to see how we can be mutually supportive where appropriate. But the real problem is that now I think the general view is that China has sought to use its economic muscle in a very unhealthy way. And that has led to serious security concerns for many countries around the world, including our own. So you've also got that reality as well. We're extremely concerned about what China sought to do in terms of our intelligence and our security and those type of interests. So these, again, is complex. It's difficult. We need to retain and remain and have a dialogue with them. And we need to be quite tough where China have crossed the line, okay? But equally, where it's in our interests, we need to work together.
Okay, David, what do you think?
Yeah, we absolutely need to be tough. But China is the world's factory now.
Yeah.
We all get everything produced there now. China's stability and economic future is also in our interests. We're all part of a world-based rules trade setup, and they need to play by those rules as well. I think that like Biden recently now just has enacted something to say that we are not engaging with them on certain technologies like AI and the like, because we worry that they'll be bad actors in the power in that technology. We've always had to be wary of especially with the 5G technology. I think we would have lost our membership of the Five Eyes if we had taken on that 5G technology.
Yeah.
It all had to be sent back, didn't it? So yeah, it's in our interests that China do well, but also abide by the rules, or the world-based rules that we have. And we're all very interdependent, absolutely.
So how do we help, as they're going through their economic struggles, do we help them with it, or is it just, as you mentioned, more just have good communication with them and then seeking how to...
We do what they do. We look at our own collective interests.
Yeah.
And where it's in our interests, we work with them and we try and look at our mutual interests, as I say. But if they're in a more vulnerable position, then perhaps they'll learn to play by the rules better. On the other hand, they could turn even more against the notion of a rules-based system globally, because they'll obviously, from a domestic public opinion point of view, the way China has got away largely with not having democracy internally is by demonstrating to the people that they really are moving the economy forward, and people's standard of living and quality of life is getting better. The Chinese middle classes have been growing massively. If all that grinds to a halt, they've got a real internal problem, because people will then start to question the fact they don't have a voice in terms of democracy. So these are, again, complicated issues. But, we have to be hard-headed about our relationship with China, make no mistake about it. Where it's in our interests, we should try and do things that are positive and constructive and mutually beneficial. Where it isn't, we shouldn't.
I mean, because if you look at the past three prime ministers, how they've been looking at it, so I think it was David Cameron, he wasn't in the past three, but he went down to China and he brought a delegation with him. He was trying to be a friend, but since then there's been a pressure on the politicians to not be so nice on China. So, for example, Boris Johnson called it a coercive autocracy. Liz Truss said that working with China is working with countries that want to set the free world in decline. Rishi Sunak said China is the biggest long-term threat. So we're not looking at it as a political. We're not looking at it, I don't think, as constructive as you're saying. So.
Well, we've got to be hard-headed,
yeah.
And where they do threaten us, we shouldn't have any. We should have zero tolerance. I think. Look, there's always been this tension between our dependence on them from a trade point of view, and our concern about their human rights abuses, what they may be doing in terms of interfering in our security. There's always been that tension. There's nothing new about that, okay? But I think we are getting more realistic and we're getting more hard-headed. And if that's the case, I welcome that.
So what should we do, for example, if we're looking at that as it is, what should we do, for example, their currency? Is moving how much countries are using their currency. So right now, the dollar is the main currency in the world. I think it's over 80%. But China in 2001 it was the 35th most used currency. Now it's the third most used currency, and they're working with countries. They've got alliances with other countries.
When you say what should we do, we can only do what we can do.
Yeah.
There's no such saying what should we do as though there's a magic wand we can wave, and they've prevented that happening in terms of their control, because it's not particularly desirable in many ways. But it's happened. There's nothing we could do to stop that in a global economy. So, what I'm saying to you, Ellie, is where we have levers, where we have the ability to exercise influence, where we have power, we should use it in our interests, right? And in the interests of the thing, our values as well as in our economic interests, okay? And that will mean being tough and hard-headed. Sometimes it will mean working in a collaborative way. But, there's not the magic, there's not the easy answer you want. Okay, so if we say we should completely isolate China, we should impose sanctions on them, we should break off all diplomatic relations with them, do I think that's clever politics? I think it's crazy. Okay, but that's probably what some people want. You want that to be my answer?
Not in the slightest.
Okay, well, some people might. So these things are incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the biggest problem probably with the squeeze now in China is for the dictators in China to manage their own people. They're going to become very unhappy. And what we have here in the West is we have open democracy, we have free speech. We're a much more liberal and pluralistic society. People in China, they have no idea of that, and they wish for those ideals. They come here to Master's University and places like that. They study here. They get a glimpse into real openness in society, and that's something that we have that they don't have. So that's a big thing that we have over them every time. And yes, they will try to do deals with corrupt regimes in parts of Africa and around the world, and Russia and Iran, but they're limited to a degree in if they really want to develop their economy and their societies and become a really smart type of economy, they need to then understand the bigger rules at play. I believe now that...
what are those bigger rules at play?
Well, democracy, freedom of exchange of good information, not to exclude people. Look at example, I think that Israel and Saudi Arabia are about to normalise relations now very shortly. That's the latest thing that's going to happen. Because nations like that become grown up, they will start to realise that there's economic benefits, but they also need to accept and respect the values of those nations. And those that like Saudi Arabia is opening up now as a society, giving more freedoms to its own individuals and its people. And the rewards of that is that you get to benefit from travel, technology, and our society should become better as a result of that. China doesn't do that, does it? It holds back its people. It doesn't let them travel. Its artists are repressed, they're locked away. They have concentration camps for Uyghur Muslims and the like, and their policy in the South Seas are dangerous. It's probably a massive flashpoint. It could be where the next World War could happen. All the trade routes, shipping lanes there. I think the States have always been very consistent with their support for Taiwan. That's a really important one. I think China knows that they shouldn't go in there, and that's our way to demonstrate to China that there are limits.
Yeah.
And supporting, for example, Taiwan is a very good example of that.
Yeah.
Not sharing technology with the AI is a very good example of that too. That's going to hold them back. They either play by good rules, or they're not. They shouldn't be. So we still have the ability to engage and not engage. But it's not just like we can't disengage entirely. We have to work with them as well.
I think there is a risk. I mean, the economy going in the wrong direction in a big way means that the regime may want to distract domestic opinion onto other matters. So the Taiwan situation becomes even more potentially sensitive, which is why the West's unity on Ukraine has actually been so important. And it has taken people by surprise. Most people did not believe the West could remain as united as they have done and as strong as they have. And I welcome that, because I think it has implications not just for Ukraine and Russia, but also for other conflicts. China, Taiwan, as David said, possibly in the future, Israel, Iran too, when Israel has to take action if Iran is intent on developing a nuclear weapon. I'm not sure about whether the Saudis are about to normalise relations with Israel. I think there is different views on that. I think there's quite a long way to go myself. But it's certainly it's certainly an option that perhaps is there that wasn't there previously. But it's interesting what David said about the students that come to Manchester University, Chinese students, because what's quite fascinating is a lot of them are very, very supportive of their own country and their own regime. And what they will say to you is, it's none of your business. We don't need your style of democracy. We don't want your style of democracy in our country. We're very happy. Now, they've said that in the context of the fact that they and their families have been doing rather well economically, which is why they're able to come to Manchester University. The question will always become that once those economic benefits go into reverse, and once the growing middle class goes into reverse in a country like China, then it may well be its citizens turn to a lack of democracy and say, this is not working, this system is fundamentally flawed. And the risk of that, of course, is the regime will become ever more oppressive. So we've already heard what they did to what they are doing, to their Muslim population. So I want to stress this, these are very, very complex issues. We have to make tough judgments. The important thing is we try and do them together with other countries, whether it's NATO, whether it's the West, whether it's our allies, in whatever space. We need to do it in a joint and in a coordinated way. And we need to try and have a strategic approach to our relationship with China.